Welcome to The Money Factor with your host, Richard Naylor.
Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, the host of the show. The Money Factor will cover both financial and business and anything of interest to the consumer. Our guest today is Rocco Ferraro, Executive Director of the Regional Planning Commission. We're really happy to have you here today.
Glad to be here.
I want to tell people a little bit about you. I read that you had your first degree, Bachelor in Urban Planning from Rutgers.
Correct.
And you got a Master's in City Planning, Urban Planning.
City and Regional Planning.
City and Regional Planning from Ohio State.
Correct.
And you worked for a number of years in Ohio before coming to New York.
Yep.
And that was in 1985.
Yes, Toledo, Ohio, the home of the Mud Hens.
Okay. And so you've got a lot of experience. And you've brought a lot of experience to a very important area. What we want to do is we want to start with getting a little bit of an idea about what Capital District Regional Planning Commission does. Now, as a librarian, I've gone to your website, we've looked up the CPI and basic things, but we didn't really know what you did.
Well, we're involved in a variety of activities. Basically, we came into existence in 1967. It was a cooperative agreement amongst the four counties, Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties, to create a regional organization to be involved in issues of importance to those four counties. So it'll be 40 years next year that we've been in existence. So during that time, we've been involved in a variety of programs and activities. Presently, we have a 20-member board, 5 members from each county. And in Albany County, the membership includes Betty Barnett, who's the city's treasurer for the city of Albany, Bill Bruce, who's with the Government Service Office in the city of Albany, Henry Dennis, who used to be a county legislator, is now a retired architect, John Graciano, also a former legislator, who is in the private business sector now, and Lucille McKnight, also a county legislator. And in the other 3 counties, we also have 5 members from each county as well, all appointed by the county legislative bodies.
I can see why that would be important with so many municipalities involved. And in New York, there are many commissions and overlapping boundaries. People don't know where Latham is, even though it's not really a city, but
that's correct.
There are a lot of municipalities, and getting them to work together, even when they want to, can be difficult. And I don't mean to be negative to the municipalities. They all face different problems, and they're in different situations. How did this get started?
Well, the way it got started was, it was pretty much, it's a voluntary association. Some people mistaken us for a state agency. We are not a state agency. We're an organization that was created by the 4 counties. Back in 1967, the federal laws were such that if a community received federal financial support, there was a desire to ascertain what impact that funding support would have not only in that particular community, but the surrounding communities. Also, there was an interest in looking at regional development patterns and regional housing issues from a federal perspective. So it was more of a federal requirement that was imposed upon us. Over the last 40 years, that has changed quite substantially, and the fact that that review process plays a very minor role in our organization anymore, and it's not a federal mandate, but in fact, the communities in this region, the counties in this region, and municipalities recognize the importance of the services that the Commission provides from a regional perspective to address some of their concerns.
Now, I moved here in '84, and sometime between there and '91, there were some pretty serious economic events and problems existing in the state of New York. And I heard a lot of talk, and I read articles about the idea that we should have regional planning to save money. Did that not also enter into?
Yeah, it enters into the picture. Of course, when we have to recognize that as a regional planning organization, we have no regulatory powers or taxing powers. So it's strictly an advisory capacity that we serve. And we are there to serve our constituents, which is the 4 counties and the communities that within those 4 counties. In terms of some of the programs we're involved with, we have various functions, and that we, moving forward to the present, that we're involved with. One is, and you're most familiar with it, is our regional information systems activities. We maintain a website, we maintain a wealth of data. We get primarily from secondary sources, the Department of Labor, the Census Bureau, and other organizations. And we make it user-friendly, so the user has that information that they could use in terms of their studies, what they may be involved with, be it in a public sector or private sector. If you're going to be doing a business plan, you need some basic demographic information about the community where you want to start up your business. So you can go to our website or access our information. I'll give you some valuable information that you need to prepare that business plan. Communities need the information for any number of purposes: grant applications, analysis of service delivery programs, and the like. So
We can put that website up on the screen so people can see it. I've used it. It's www.
.cdrpc.org.
Right.
And certainly we maintain it in-house ourselves, and we've gotten a lot of access to that particular site. A number of hits have been made during the course of the year, so it's a very valuable site to the residents of the region.
So what else do you do? I guess that's the logical next question.
Sure, and another functional area we're involved with is working with quality regions activities, basically looking at the land use issue. Now, the fact of the matter is that New York State is a home rule state, which basically means that land use regulations are being decided by all the cities, towns, and villages. In our 4 counties, we have 79 cities, towns, and villages. Each decide their own land use destiny. And certainly that's not going to change in terms of the Regional Planning Commission is not going to at any particular time take over that responsibility. The citizens in the region like that type of arrangement, and therefore that's going to continue to exist. So our role is to serve as a role as educator in terms of land use patterns, land use issues, and how the local decisions impact the region in terms of providing services as we move along. We have, in this particular case, we have a partnership with the Capital District Transportation Committee. They're involved in transportation planning in the region. And one of our missions is to cooperate and collaborate with other organizations. So we're not going to recreate the wheel ourselves. It's already been out there, so we're going to work with our sister organizations to move forward. The efforts associated with the quality regions, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. I'd like to discuss that a little bit more in terms of our population
Absolutely.
projections and growth associated with that. Gives us some insight, the community some insight into what growth patterns may occur in the future and what those implications are. But our role is more of an educator and to facilitate dialogue in the communities, because they are ultimately responsible for their land use decisions. Another program we're involved with is economic development. Now, our role there is more limited in that we serve as a resource. We don't go out to the trade shows or promote the region per se. We leave that the responsibility to those other entities in this region, both at the county level and regional level, that are involved in those types of activities. Our role is more to serve as a resource to those other organizations, to the business community, in terms of moving forward in terms of the activities that you're trying to promote for the capital region.
I noticed on one of your pages on your website you had a map showing different counties, and farther west, outside of the Capital District, that I think is your area, there was something about global trade areas, global counties?
Foreign trade zones?
Foreign trade zones.
Okay, yes.
Does that help the small business? Does it help the region?
If you are involved in exporting and importing activities, most definitely. There's financial opportunities associated with being located within a foreign trade zone. Now, we are the grantee for the foreign trade zone. It gets a little technical in terms of those roles and responsibilities, but we have hired Capital District Trade Strategies to work on our behalf to administer and promote the foreign trade zones as an economic development tool here in the capital region. Heretofore, it's been underutilized, but we feel with the proper outreach associated with those firms involved in that particular business, that in fact we could be more effective in promoting that as a useful tool for those businesses involved in importing and exporting to other countries.
Okay.
Another program we're involved with as well is water, environmental related programs, specifically water quality. And that's on 2 fronts at this stage of the game. Number one is stormwater management. There are significant issues out there in terms of how we address issues of pollution in our streams, erosion control issues and things like that. And there are requirements by the federal government under the Clean Water Act to more effectively address those particular issues. We're working with the communities in our region to evaluate what they have on their books now in terms of addressing issues with stormwater management and what they may need to adopt in terms of regulations in the future to meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act to address issues of soil and sedimentation control issues.
That's being phased in, isn't it, since what, 2003?
Yes, exactly. In New York State, the federal government has requirements as expressed in the Clean Water Act, and then in this particular instance, the Department of Environmental Conservation for New York State is responsible for implementation of those program components. And stormwater management, in our case, is being phased in over a 5-year period. We're in year 3 right now. By the end of year 5, the communities have to have regulations on their books to address this issue. And that's why you see in some locations now large-scale developments, be it residential, commercial. You see these retention and detention basins located at the entrance or within the subdivision itself. That's part of the stormwater management, to manage the stormwater so you don't get these significant surges at any one time that could be disruptive to the environment, the ecosystem.
And that's part of the same program where we were dealing with parking lots and large flat areas where you would have, say, oil from automobiles and things that wash off into the water supply.
Exactly, because the water, the rainwater that comes off the driveways, comes off the parking lots, comes off your lawn, that may have pesticides, oils, and things like that goes directly into the sewer. That sewer goes directly into the rivers. Okay, there's no treatment that takes place in those communities where there's separate stormwater systems. So that water is discharged directly into the river. So what measures do we need in order to address those pollution concerns that may result due to activities that were in terms of the oils and other things that exist? The other part of that is in the older cities, in the older communities, they have what's called combined sewer systems. Okay, so the distinction there is that in our suburban communities, the sewage from our house flows in one pipe that goes to a sewage treatment plant. The stormwater, on the other hand, goes directly into a pipe and directly into the streams.
Does that happen in any of the local areas here?
Yeah, in town of Colonie.
Oh.
For example. Now, the combined sewer systems is both the stormwater and the sewage from your home goes into one pipe. That all goes to the sewage treatment plant. Okay. Which is in Manans along the Hudson River in the case of Albany County.
So it's not specifically that you were concerned about or that the government was concerned about?
We're concerned about that too also,
okay,
because under normal conditions that's great because that stormwater is treated before it's discharged into the Hudson River. However, what happens when you have significant rain events? You have an overflow situation that occurs.
Okay.
So that water goes directly into the stream. It doesn't have the capacity to go to the sewage treatment plant. The lines are full and it goes directly into the stream. The result is the sewage both from your house and from the streets goes directly into the Hudson River.
And then it's too late to treat.
And it's too late to treat, exactly. So we're involved right now with the study involving 6 communities, 4 in Albany County and 2 in Rensselaer County, to address issues of the combined sewer overflow study. And that, once again, it's a federal mandate that communities across the country, not just in the capital region in New York State, have to address this particular problem. And so this is a program that's been going on for the last 30, 40 years. The Clean Water Act of 1972 was the genesis of this, and it takes time to implement these particular programs. And combined sewer is one element of that that's getting heavy emphasis right now. And it's a perfect example where the 6 communities are working together because it's much more cost efficient to do the study and probably come up with recommendations for 6 communities collectively than each community doing their own independent study and resulting in implementation strategies as well. So it's a perfect example how regionalism doesn't have to be 4 county based. You can have 2 or 3 or 4 communities working together to solve a singular problem. And this is a perfect example where it could be much more cost effective addressing as a singular problem collectively rather than individually.
That is a good example.
Another program that we're involved with also is, few people are aware of it, is that we are responsible for the Capital District Youth Center, the Juvenile Detention Center that's located off Albany Shaker Road.
You call it View Center?
The Youth Center.
Youth Center,
I'm sorry,
okay.
the
No,
Youth Center.
okay.
And that houses children 16 and under who have had serious consequences with the laws, run-ins with the law, and until their case is adjudicated, they are housed there. The judge says you will go to the juvenile detention center until your case is adjudicated. And so CDRPC created a subsidiary, if you will, the Capital District Youth Center Incorporated. And I, as the head of the CDRPC, is also the chief administrator of that. So once again, a perfect example where you have a regional facility, a bricks and mortar facility in this particular case, that each county cannot afford to have one of these facilities. But the 4 counties, it becomes much more affordable and achieves the issue of, number one, affordability, and secondly, the social needs of the children. Because if you don't have one in this region, when we did not have one in this region, those children were being sent to Syracuse, New York City, other locations throughout the state. So the commuting was a long distance for those who want to see those kids to be able to get there. So by having one right here in the capital region, it serves a number of purposes.
It brought up a question. We do need to go back. I see that there's another thing that you do as well, but when you point out so many things that the Capital District Regional Planning Commission is involved with, I get the idea that you're a tool, but you can be used for whatever purpose. You're purely for regional planning, and you're not specifically for anything that you have to be used for.
Yeah, we pretty much are, we find the guidance of my board, the 20 members of the board provide the direction in terms of the work program that the commission will follow. And we have evolved over time, and for instance, right now we're emphasis on the combined sewer overflow system under water quality issues. 6-7 years from now, that may not be the case, and we'll go into some other issues. So we have evolved over the 40 years, and we are involved in a number of different programs, and we are objective in our analysis in terms of there's very little political interference in the programs that we're involved with. And so there's a sense that you could come to the commission getting a good sense of objectivity associated with on how to move forward in certain programs and activities.
Well, they seem to be, when I say they, the regional bodies, the county bodies, the municipal bodies seem to have been able to agree together as part of your board of what the overall or the highest goals should be.
That is correct, and as you see programmatically, we're involved in different programs that have different impacts on different communities collectively in the region. Some of our programs are 4 county focused, some may be 2 counties, some may be a group of municipalities. So it is variable, and what we have to do is keep evolving as time moves on. We can't be static, but we always have to try to stay ahead of the curve in terms of meeting the needs of our constituencies.
Now there was one more thing on there, and it sounds technical, which could mean it's general, but maybe we should cover that.
The technical support services is basically one of the prime areas there's 2 prime areas that we work in that arena. Number one is school enrollment projections. Many of the school districts do contract with us to prepare school enrollment projections on their behalf to address issues of growth that may be occurring in their community and to ascertain what impact that will have on their school enrollment over the next 5 years or so. And once again, it provides a level of objectivity in terms of buy-in by the community. It's not the school district that's preparing the projections, it's a third party that's preparing them. So in terms of identifying what may occur in the future, there may be the buy-in may be easier to provide. The other part is geographic information systems. The code for that is GIS, right. Computer mapping, and we provide technical support services to any number of organizations, including the Capital District Transportation Authority, in terms of mapping systems, routes, and things like that on their behalf, as they're involved in doing their strategic planning effort. Watershed studies, we're involved with independent watershed areas in terms of mapping and looking at issues associated with that. So that's just an example of some of the support services that we provide at the commission as well.
The librarian has to come out once in a while, and just to mention that the town of Colonie's GIS system is on the town website, and it does show a lot of these different natural and population type boundaries.
Yeah, it's an excellent resource, and once again, in terms of our collaboration coordination, we collaborate and coordinate with with the counties and the municipalities that have GIS systems, so we're not duplicating each other's activities. And there's a good network. The GIS specialists in this region have a good network, and they dialogue with each other. So not everyone is doing the same thing. There's a shared information, sort of shared resource that's taking place. In this case, geographic information systems. And you know, I've been in planning since 1975, and boy, I wish I had that type of support when I started out in planning. It's not just using the colored pencils anymore,
right?
You know, and spending literally months drawing maps. Now it's literally to push a button. You could
Oh,
generate
you want the streams?
some
Okay.
visuals. Yes, exactly. So
we started out talking about where Capital District Regional Planning Commission came from, some of the dynamics that propelled it forward. And we chatted a little bit once before, and we talked about the nanotechnology as well as the population. Those two things are very tied together.
right.
We're projecting an increase, at least we're hoping that there's an upswell of economic dividends from the whole project. What can you all bring to this? What light can you shed on that?
Well, it's always very dangerous when you're looking into a crystal ball. It can be quite difficult. But one of the games, one of the activities that we are involved with is preparation of population projections and trying to look at these various factors and to ascertain, okay, what's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So one of the responsibilities that we have at the Commission is to prepare population projections for each one of those cities, towns, and villages in the Capital District. And several years ago, we prepared our projections, and basically, as you can see from the graph, that in the year 2000, we had about 794,000 persons in the 4 counties, which was about 2.5% increase from 1990. Over the course of the next 10 years to 2010, we're expecting a growth of about 4% in population, leading out to another 2.5% to 3% over the course of the next 30 years to 2040, where Rocky Ferraro's crystal ball is suggesting we'll have 884,000 persons in change in the capital region. Now, some would claim that number is too low. Others claim it's too high. That's when you start saying, oh, what assumptions go into in developing those particular projections. If we were looking at the low side for a second, because this all ties into the nanotech activity and the importance of economic development in this region in terms of promoting
and
growth.
that means we're not looking at a decrease. Nobody's forecasting a decrease at this point.
If in fact, there are decreases that have been predicted, and they are predicted at this particular point. Cornell University, which the demographers there are excellent group of individual statisticians there, they don't necessarily do projections. What they do is extrapolations. If we take what occurred historically and moved it forward for the next 20, 30 years, what would happen? In fact, in our region, based on an extrapolation of the historical to the future, we will be declining a population. They're projecting an increase of about 3,000 persons, just under 800,000 by 2010, and then from there forward to 2030, going down to a population we had in 1990 of about 777,000 persons.
Wow. Why won't that happen?
Well, the reason why that won't happen, in our feeling, why we do not believe that's going to happen, and once again, in our projections, is that we're making a change in assumption. There's 2 components for population growth. One is due to a natural rate of change, and the other is due to migration. Now, natural rate of change is births and deaths. Obviously, if you have more births than deaths, you have a net gain. If more deaths than births, you have a net loss associated with that. Historically, in this region, we've had a net gain due to the number of births that have occurred. As the baby boom generation ages out, the baby boom generation being born between 1946 and 1964, the oldest baby boomer being 60 years old this year, as that group ages out, there's going to be a significant number of deaths that will be occurring, in particular 2030 and 2025 and beyond. So the number of deaths is expected to grow at a much greater rate than the birth rate is expected, the number of births that are expected to take place. Not so much because of the rate, but it goes to the sheer numbers.
Right.
Okay, because we're going to be living longer, of course, but there's so many baby boomers that we're all well aware of in terms of that bubble, as that bubble passes along. So The extrapolation is such, and there's no reason to argue with that, this is certainly, in my opinion, is very true, that the number of births in the region will outnumber the number of births as we move beyond 2010.
Deaths will
I'm
outnumber.
sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry. Number of births will the number of deaths will
outnumber.
outgrow the number of births as we move out in the year 2015 and beyond. The other part of that is migration, and that's where it gets a little tricky. So in terms of the natural rate of change, the birth rates, death rates seem reasonable for our region as projected by Cornell University. The other part is migration. Now, the major source of information we have in migration is from the Internal Revenue Service. Those of us who make an income on an annual basis, we have to report our income to the Internal Revenue Service, and we fill out the forms and we submit it to the IRS. Well, what the IRS is able to do in the aggregate, not individually, so I don't know what your income tax is, Richard, individually, but in the aggregate, we're able to get information in terms of how many people file, how many households and individuals in those households filled out income tax forms from one year to the next. So I could look at and say, okay, in the aggregate, that what has been a net loss or gain of the number of persons in the capital region due to migration, those who are income tax filers. Now, when you look at the graph here, what I have graphed here is from 1980 to 2003, which is the latest year that's available because we're comparing one year to the last, so it's 2004, 2003 data.
Right.
You will see that a lot of the numbers are below. They're in red below that, the zero line, if you will, which shows that with the exception of some years in the late 1980s, we've had a decline in persons in this region due to migration. So we had a net loss of persons coming into the four counties versus there were more people leaving the four counties than people moving into the four counties.
And that goes into the big thing of everybody moving to the southwest and the south and Nevada.
Exactly, wherever. And so, as you could see here, that with the exception of some the late part of the 1980s, we had some marginal increases, but for the most part, particularly during the 1990s, we had significant losses of persons due to migration. If you were to extrapolate that out, along with our discussion about the natural rate of change, we would have a net loss in population during the next 30 years. However, what we're suggesting, and we developed our projection 2 years ago, so we didn't have the benefit of those later numbers. You see in the last 3 years, we've actually seen significant gains due to migration in the capital region. And peaking in 2002, we had a net increase of 2,600 persons who filled out income taxes. Okay, so the universe is not everyone; it's those people who fill out income taxes. Okay, so what we suggest in our projections is that there's going to be a turnaround due to migration in the capital region, and therefore we're expecting the population growth to continue, as I showed you a few minutes ago. So we're basically saying we bottomed out, and it's so very difficult to identify when the curvature of that line changes. So we're saying it has changed and it's going to move up.
So the people that are saying nanotechnology and the recognition that this region is developing have at least something to look at and say, well, so far so good.
That is correct. That is correct. Now, some would suggest that our numbers may be too low, that the population growth is really going to take off over the next 10 to 15 years because of our investments that we're making in nanotechnology, and therefore our numbers may, in fact, be too low.
Well, I don't know what people are hoping for, but
well, I can show you some maps in a few minutes if you'd like,
I think
to get a sense of what may occur on a couple what-if scenarios.
And we can put those up on the TV.
Okay. What we have done in the commission, in conjunction with the Capital District Transportation Committee, the group I referred to before, is to evaluate 4 alternative development scenarios, what-if scenarios in terms of population activity in the capital region, and what are the impacts in terms of land use on the region. The first one is, the first scenario 1, is what if our populations came out about 90,000 person increase over the next 40 years between 2000 and 2040. What happens if in fact we had that 90,000 person increase? Where would they settle? Well, what you see here is that based on existing policies, they have more growth in the suburban locations, continued contraction, maybe stabilization within our cities and our inner suburbs, but most of the growth will continue spreading out further and further out. Now, the second scenario is, what if we had the same 90,000 plus population increase over the next 40 years, but we had a more aggressive urban reinvestment policies, i.e. our cities became more attractive as a place to live, and also allowed a higher density development in our inner suburbs, places like the town of Colonie, that in terms of the densities for residential development will be increased. What would occur at that particular point? And as noted on the map there, you see a higher concentration of development within those already built up areas, and it will be the development will not be as spread out.
So you see both of those things as possible based on government policy?
Well, the first scenario is based on existing government policies.
Okay.
The second one is based on a redirection, if you will. Number one, once again, promoting policies that make the cities more attractive as a place to live. And then secondly, in some of the suburban communities, to allow for a higher density development than presently exists under existing land use regulations. So a couple significant what-if scenarios there in terms of taking place. The third scenario that we developed is, what if the rate of growth in our region was comparable to the national rate of growth? Now, our region, for the sake of our discussion, is growing about 2.5 to 0.3% per year. Okay, 0.3, not 3%, but 0.3% per year.
Sounds like an inflation target.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. The national rate of growth is 1% per year.
Ah.
So some areas are growing less, like ours, and some are growing much faster, like you mentioned before, the Southwest, places like Nevada, Southeast, etc. So what about, seems reasonable, let's go that 1% per year rate of growth in the capital region over the next 40 years. What would happen then? Well, what would happen would be 309,000 person increase over the next 4 years in population.
Wow.
Where would those people go? Well, this particular scenario, number 3, that's displayed, shows that these people will be based on existing policies. If we maintain our existing policies that exist right now in terms of development patterns and the like, this is what would happen. And you see significant increases in that, going to outer ring of suburban locations, Clifton Park, Half Moon, parts of Bethlehem, other parts of Guilderland, up the Northway Corridor, basically.
Right.
The spine of the Northway Corridor, you see significant growth, and more growth even in those more rural areas. In the hill towns of Albany County would experience some more growth. Not as much, obviously, in the suburban locations because they don't have the services, but nevertheless more growth. So it can have a significant impact on our land use. The final scenario is, okay, once again, we're very successful with our technology development activities and all those spin-offs that occur as a result of that, and we have that 1% per annual rate of growth. But in this particular case, we go back to our urban reinvestment policy and our higher density development policy for our inner ring suburban communities and our already built up areas, if you will. We have infill development opportunities taking place. What would happen then? As you can see on this particular map, the result is that most of that growth will be concentrated in those existing built up areas, with the spreading out occurring not as extensive as the third scenario where you have a more of a sprawl-like pattern of growth, but it'll be a little bit more concentrated. But once again, you have to accommodate growth, so you have to go into virgin land and things like that to address areas that were otherwise undeveloped so that it would become developed. So those are the 4 scenarios that we evaluated at the commission. And once again, the whole purpose of this is to educate the public, have conversations, dialogues, similar to what we're having here, a meeting with neighborhood organizations, business groups, discussing these types of issues to create a dialogue in terms of what land use policies may be appropriate to address growth that's going to occur here in the future in the capital region. So we're ready and prepared for it.
I want to really thank you for coming on and helping us out and explaining some of this. I understand a lot better. It's very exciting, and we're going to need some advice as we go forward.
And that's what we're there to help out. Certainly, it's we have issues that in terms of being prepared from a land use perspective to address these types of issues.
So let's thank everybody for joining us on this conversation and Money Factor, and we'll see you next time. That's pretty good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.